My son called me the night before his wedding to ask if I could move to a different table. Not a different seat. A different table. The one I'd been assigned was, apparently, too close to the head table for his future in-laws' comfort. I was paying $38,000 for that wedding. I'd been paying for 11 months, and I said very quietly that if my table moved, so did my check. He laughed a little, the nervous laugh he's had since he was 9 years old. "Mom, don't be dramatic." I hung up and I called my accountant. By morning, the catering deposit, the venue hold, the florist retainer, every dollar with my name on it was in the process of coming home. Here's how a retired seamstress from Sudbury, Ontario got called difficult for 11 months and then got called right. My name is Harriet. No, wait. My name is Evelyn. Evelyn Marsh. I'm 63 years old, and I have been sewing other people's clothing since I was 19. Started in a factory on the edge of town, the kind of place where you didn't sit down for 8 hours and the fluorescent lights buzzed so loud you stopped hearing them after a while. I worked my way from the floor to my own alteration shop on Elm Street, a narrow little space between a pharmacy and a hair salon, and I built it into something. 2 locations now. A small team of women who are better at this work than I ever was. I do custom bridal alterations, suits, christening gowns, heirloom repairs. Last year, a woman brought me her grandmother's wedding dress from 1951, and I spent 40 hours making it wearable for a woman who would have otherwise never gotten to walk down an aisle in her family's history. I cried when she came for the fitting. I always cry. It's an occupational hazard. My hands look like what they are. Needle pricks along every fingertip, a faint scar on my left thumb from a rotary cutter when I was 22 and not yet careful enough. The joints on my right hand are starting to stiffen in the cold, which is a problem in a city that has real winters, and I manage it with a brace I wear at night and pretend I don't wear during the day. I raised my son, Owen, alone. His father left when Owen was 4, not dramatically. He just stopped coming home with the same frequency and eventually stopped altogether, and the divorce was the paperwork that caught up to what had already happened. I don't say that bitterly anymore. I said it bitterly for years. Now I say it the way you describe weather that's already passed. Owen grew up in the apartment above the shop. He did his homework on the cutting table. He knows how to thread a needle and press a seam, and he's never once been embarrassed by any of it. At least not until he met Theron Ashby's family. Theron is my son's husband, or he was going to be. I want to be precise about the order things happened in, so I'll tell you about the Ashbys first, before I tell you about the phone call, because the phone call makes no sense without them. The Ashbys are from Ottawa. Old family, long name in certain circles. The kind of family that has a summer place they call the cottage, but which is, in fact, a 4-bedroom house on a lake with a boathouse. Theron's father, a man I'll call by his title because that's how he introduced himself, Professor Ashby, though he retired 8 years ago, had the particular energy of a man who has always been the most educated person in every room he's entered and has begun to believe this is a law of nature rather than a coincidence of circumstance. Theron's mother, Claudette, was gracious in a way that I've since learned to recognize as performance. She asked me about my work once at the engagement dinner with the bright, tilted head interest of someone who has already decided they will not retain the answer. "A seamstress," she said when I'd explained. "How lovely. So tactile." She said tactile the way you'd say it about a therapy dog. I brought them a bottle of Ontario wine at that dinner. I'd been told they preferred French. I found that out when Claudette asked, pleasantly, where I'd found this, and then set it aside. I should have known then. I've told myself that 100 times since. But I wanted Owen to be happy, and Owen was happy in a way I hadn't seen him be happy in years. Theron is genuinely kind. I want to say that clearly because this story is not about Theron. Theron was caught between 2 families, and he handled it imperfectly, and I think he knows that now. But he's not the villain. The villains in a story like this are rarely the young people in love. They're the people around them who've decided that love is an occasion for positioning. The wedding planning started warmly enough. Owen called me every week. We talked about the venue. They'd chosen a restored heritage property outside of Kingston. Beautiful place, the kind of old limestone building that costs what it costs because there's nothing else like it in the province. $38,000, all in, for the venue, the catering, the flowers, the photographer, the band for the evening. I offered. I want to say that again. I offered. Before anyone asked, it was the greatest check I ever intended to write, and I meant every cent of it. What I did not do, because I was my mother's daughter and not a fool, was hand anyone a blank authorization. I paid each vendor directly. I signed every contract myself. My accountant, a steady woman named Noreen, who has kept my books for 14 years and who tells me things I don't want to hear when I need to hear them. She reviewed every agreement before I put my name on it. Noreen circled the cancellation clauses on all of them and said, in her very Noreen way, "You're the client on all of these, Ev. They answer to you, not to anyone named Ashby." I said, "I know, Noreen," she said, "just making sure you know you know." I filed the contracts in a blue accordion folder that lives in the filing cabinet in my back office between taxes 2022 and lease renewal. I forgot about the cancellation clauses entirely. For about 8 months. The Ashby's involvement in the planning was a slow current that I didn't feel pulling until I was already past the point I could easily swim back from. It started reasonably. Claudette had a caterer she preferred. The venue already had an exclusive caterer, so that went nowhere, but it set a tone. Then there were opinions about the floral arrangements. Mine were apparently too country style. A phrase Claudette used with a little smile that managed to include my shop, my apartment, my whole life's aesthetic in its gentle condescension. Then the guest list. The guest list is where things got real. Owen and Theron had started with 120 people. Reasonable, the Ashbys began adding. A cousin who was a judge, a colleague of Professor Ashby's from his university days, an old family friend who simply had to be included because of some unspecified history of importance. By the time the final list came to me, and it came to me the way a bill comes, as a finished thing I was expected to approve, it was 174. My side had shrunk to fit. My sister, my 2 closest friends from the shop, the woman who'd covered for me every week when Owen had hockey practice, and I couldn't close up in time. She was cut. I was told there simply wasn't room. I said something then. I called Owen and I said, "Ruth has been like an aunt to you since you were 7. She's not on the list." Owen said, "Mom, it's complicated. The Ashbys have a lot of people who..." I said, "Owen, Ruth." He said he'd look into it. Ruth did not end up on the list. I swallowed it because I always swallow things, and because I told myself the same lie every decent parent tells themselves. It's not about me. It's his day. Don't make it about you. That particular lie has a long shelf life because it's built on love. It tastes like self-sacrifice, which is something parents are trained to find noble. What it actually is, I understand now, is permission. When you say it's not about me, you're handing the people who've already decided you don't matter the words to keep you quiet. They count on your love being bigger than your dignity. They are usually right, up until the moment they aren't. My friend Grace, she's worked at the shop for 9 years, came to me after her textile job folded, and stayed because she said it was the first place she'd ever felt like her work was seen. Grace is the one who told me what I didn't want to hear. We were closing up one Thursday evening, and I was telling her about the seating arrangement I'd just received, and she set down the bolt of linen she was carrying and looked at me. "Where are they putting you?" she asked. I told her. "Table 9. Not the head table, that was expected. But not the parents' table either, which is where I'd assumed I'd be, where Owen's side of the family would be. Where the people who'd held us up for 30 years were seated. Table 9 was near the back, near the bar service entrance, next to Theron's great-uncle, who was apparently very hard of hearing, and would be bringing his medical alert dog. "Evelyn," Grace said, "you're paying $38,000 to sit next to a stranger's dog." She didn't say it cruelly. Grace doesn't do cruelty. She said it the way a person says a true thing that they know is going to land hard. "It's Owen's day," I said. "It's your money," she said. "And they are using your money to fund a party where your son's family treats you like a guest who showed up without being..." invited. That's not stepping back. That's being erased. I drove home that night and I didn't sleep well, which is unusual for me. I've slept fine through harder things than a seating chart. But something Grace had said kept finding me. They are using your money. Not your son. The people around him. I called Owen the next morning and asked calmly whether there was any flexibility in the seating. I said I'd noticed I wasn't at the family table and I wanted to understand the thinking. There was a pause. Owen's pauses tell me things. I've been reading them for 30 years. And then he said Claudette had been very involved in the arrangement and that it was meant to help the families mix. I said, Owen, I'm not asking to mix. I'm asking to sit with my family at my son's wedding. Another pause. He said he'd talk to Theron. 2 days later, Theron called me. He was kind, as Theron always is, and genuinely uncomfortable, which I could hear. He said the table arrangement had been set for some time and that moving it now would mean restructuring a lot of the plan. He said Claudette had strong feelings about the flow of the room. He said, and I believe he didn't know how this would sound. Evelyn, I hope you understand that you'll still be very much part of the day. As though attendance were the point. As though showing up and paying for the room and sitting by the service entrance were equivalent to being there. I said, I understand. And I thanked him for calling. And I hung up and I sat in my back office with the blue accordion folder sitting on the filing cabinet 6 feet away from me, and I thought about what Noreen had said. You're the client on all of these, they answer to you. I still didn't do anything. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. I had the information. I had the paperwork. I had 9 months of small cruelties stacked behind me like evidence, and I still waited. Because he's my son. Because I kept thinking I'd misread something. Because the hope that your child will come back to themselves is the most durable thing in a mother. It does not give up easily. It should not give up easily. The night before the wedding, Owen called at 9:47 p.m. I remember the time because I was in bed reading, which I almost never am before 11, and I'd turned in early because the next day was long. Mom! His voice had that careful quality, the one that means he's been coached. So Theron's parents have a concern about the table arrangement. I waited. They feel like table 9 is actually. They think if you're at table 9, it might look like the families aren't unified? Because it's so close to the He stopped. They want to move you to table 12. Table 12. I'd seen the layout. Table 12 was near the coat check. Owen, I said. I know, Mom. I know how it sounds. Table 12 is by the coat check. It's still in the room. It is still in the room, I agreed. And table 9 was by the bar service entrance. So the movement is from one edge of the room to a different edge of the room. Silence. Owen, I need you to hear me. I am your mother. I sewed your grad gown because you wanted one that fit properly. I drove 4 hours to every hockey tournament in this province until you were 16. I have been paying for this wedding for 11 months with money I earned on hands that I'm going to show you someday so you actually understand what I'm talking about. And the night before the wedding, your future in-laws want me at table 12. Mom, please don't make this. Don't make this. What? A long pause. Then quietly, don't make this a thing. And there it was. Don't make this a thing. The request every parent in this position receives, the one that translates to, we need you to absorb this, smile, pay, and disappear. Your discomfort is the problem, not the treatment causing it. I said, I'm not making it a thing, Owen. I'm telling you that I won't be moving to table 12. And if the Ashby's comfort with the room arrangement matters more than your mother's place in it, then I need to think about what I'm actually funding here. He said, Mom, I said, get some sleep. It's your wedding day tomorrow. And I hung up. I did not go back to sleep. I sat in my kitchen with the blue accordion folder, which I'd brought home from the shop that week without quite admitting to myself why, and I opened it. I read every cancellation clause. Noreen had marked them all. The venue, cancellation with more than 60 days' notice, 70% refund of deposits paid. We were 18 days out, past that window, except for the catering, which had a separate agreement with a 30-day clause I'd negotiated because I'd asked about it. The florist, non-refundable. The photographer, non-refundable. The band, 50% return if canceled more than 2 weeks prior. We were 18 days out. 50% of the band deposit was coming back. Not everything. Not the whole $38,000, but the venue and the catering together were $22,200 of that total. And the venue's clause had an exception. I'd asked Sandra. Noreen. She is steady as a vault. Noreen had flagged. If the venue could rebook the date within a reasonable window, the cancellation penalty was waived entirely and the full deposit returned. It was a Saturday in late September. In Kingston, Ontario. Those book fast. I called Noreen at 10:15 at night. She answered because Noreen has answered my calls at unreasonable hours for 14 years, and she knew from my voice that something had happened. Tell me, she said. I told her. All of it. Not the 11 months, because she knew most of it, but the phone call. Table 12, don't make this a thing. Noreen was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you want to do? I want to know if I can pull the catering and venue without losing everything. You can pull both, Noreen said, and I heard her moving, the familiar sound of a desk drawer, papers. You're past 60 days on the venue, but within the rebook clause. September Saturdays at that property. They'll rebook it. I'd put money on it. Catering, you're inside 30 days. That's a clean cancellation. You'll lose the florist and you'll lose half the photographer, but you're looking at getting somewhere between $22,000 and $25,000 back. And if I do it, there's no wedding. Not that one. Not on that date. A pause. Evelyn, is that what you want? I looked at my hands, the needle pricks, the scar, the brace on the side table that I pretend I don't need. I want my son to understand that I am not a line item, I said. I want the Ashbys to understand that the money they've been treating as a resource they manage came from a seamstress in Sudbury who didn't sit down for 8 hours a day for 40 years so that she could sit by the coat check at her son's wedding. All right, Noreen said, calm as concrete. I'll make the calls first thing. No, I said. Not first thing, now. A pause. Ev, it's almost 10:30. The venue office. The venue has a client services line for event changes. It's in Section 7 of the contract. I know because I read it. I had read it. In November, sitting at my cutting table with a cup of tea, the way I read everything I sign. Call the line. Leave a formal notice tonight so it's time-stamped. I don't want Owen or the Ashbys to reach the venue before my cancellation does. A beat. Then Noreen said something she almost never says. Good for you, Ev. She made the calls. The venue's evening line reached an event coordinator who took the notice and confirmed she'd log it immediately. Noreen sent the follow-up email at 10:48 p.m. The catering company had a contact form for urgent changes. Noreen sent that too, with her firm's letterhead, identifying herself as my representative and formally initiating cancellation per the contract terms. By 11 o'clock, 2 of the 3 largest pieces of my $38,000 had begun their journey home. I did not go to bed. I sat in my kitchen and I waited, because I knew my son would call and I wanted to be steady when he did. He called at 11:42. He'd found out from Theron, who'd gotten a call from the venue coordinator, who'd apparently reached out to the contact listed second on the event file. Theron, because the Ashbys had added him during one of the planning sessions. The coordinator had wanted to confirm the cancellation request had come from the account holder. It had. It always had. Mom. His voice was different from the call 2 hours before. The coached quality was gone. What was left was something I hadn't heard in about a year. He just sounded like Owen. Mom, what did you do? I did what I said I'd consider doing, I said. I asked whether there was flexibility. There wasn't. So I've initiated cancellation on the venue and the catering. The wedding is tomorrow. I know when the wedding is. Mom. His voice cracked. Mom, I didn't mean. Table 12 wasn't my idea. I know it wasn't your idea. I kept my voice level. I've spent 40 years learning to keep my hands steady. The voice follows eventually. But you called me at 10 o'clock the night before your wedding and asked me to move to the table by the coat check, Owen. And when I said I wouldn't, you asked me not to make it a thing. Those were your words. Your choice. A long silence. I could hear him breathing. I've been paying for this wedding since January, I said. Every vendor contract has my name on it. Because I've been in business long enough to know you don't give anyone $38,000 and hope they stay kind. You stay the client. I stayed. I paused. The Ashbys wanted my money in my absence. I've decided they can have one or the other, not both. Mom, Claudette is going to. I know what Claudette is going to do, I said. She's going to be very upset. She's going to say I've humiliated the family. She may say something about class or about how this reflects on the wedding, on her name. She's going to behave exactly the way a person behaves when they've just discovered that the floor they've been walking on belonged to someone else. Owen didn't say anything. I need you to hear something, I said. And I need you to actually hear it, not just wait for me to stop talking. I'm listening, he said, quietly. And I thought, there you are. There's the boy who used to sit at my cutting table. I didn't do this, Maisel, because of a table. The table was just the last thing. I did this because for 11 months, I watched the people you're marrying into treat me like a funding mechanism they had to tolerate. I was not in a single photograph they chose for the engagement display. I was introduced to their friends twice, and both times, Claudette described me as working in alterations, with a little pause before alterations, the kind of pause that does a lot of work. My friend Ruth, who you spent half your childhood with, was taken off the guest list because the Ashby family needed room for a retired professor's university colleague. And when I finally said something, I was asked not to make it a thing. I stopped. That's 11 months, Owen. Not a table. 11 months. Another silence, and this one had a different quality. Not the silence of someone waiting, the silence of someone recalculating. I knew about Ruth, he said at last, very quietly. I know you knew. I should have pushed back harder. Yes, I said. You should have. He was quiet again. She must have been so hurt. She understood, I said. But it's not really about whether she understood. We stayed on the phone for a while after that, not saying much. It was close to midnight. He had a wedding in 12 hours that no longer had a venue or a caterer. I didn't pretend that wasn't a serious thing. It was a serious thing. I had done a serious thing, and I wasn't going to wrap it in softness it didn't deserve. I'll talk to you tomorrow, I said, after you've had some sleep, and after Theron knows what happened, and after you've all had a chance to think. This doesn't have to be the end of anything, Owen, but it does have to be the beginning of something different. I hung up, and I went and stood in my shop for a while. Not the front, just the back workroom, where the machines were covered, and the dress forms stood in their quiet row, and the smell of the place was just fabric and the faint cedar of the storage shelf. I've made a lot of important decisions in that room. It felt like the right place to have made this one. Claudette called me the next morning at 8. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was everything I'd expected. Starts composed, ends somewhere with its gloves off. I was being destructive. I was punishing a young couple for something that wasn't their fault. I had humiliated the Ashby name. I should, of course, restore everything immediately, as though I were a utility that had been shut off by accident. Restore everything immediately, as though it were an outage, as though $38,000 of my work were a tap she could simply turn back on. I called her back from my shop, in my work apron, a seam ripper in my pocket, because that is who I am, and I was done pretending otherwise. Claudette, I said, I got your message. Evelyn, I'm so glad. Now clearly what we need to do is… No, I said, a pause that had weight to it. I said no, I said. I've been very patient with that word this year. I should have used it sooner. The cancellation stands. What followed, over the next 2 days, was instructive. Because when my $38,000 left the room, what remained was a very clear picture of what had always been true. The Ashby family had no intention of paying for a wedding of that scale themselves. Professor Ashby's academic pension and Claudette's careful management of appearances had maintained the image of a family of means without the substance behind it. Theron made a reasonable salary as an urban planner. Owen was a high school teacher. Nobody in this wedding had the money for what the Ashbys had been planning, except me, the woman in the apron, the seamstress from Sudbury, the crested invitations, the limestone heritage venue, the string quartet for the ceremony. All of it had been built on my deposits and sustained by my signature. The moment my name came off those contracts, the whole structure had nothing to stand on. Owen came to my shop that Saturday morning, alone, no Theron, no Ashbys. He sat in the same chair he used to do his homework in, and he looked at my hands the way he sometimes did when he was small, before he had words for what he understood about them. "She introduced you as working in alterations," he said. "Not as my mom. Not as the person who paid for the wedding. Just alterations." With that pause, "I noticed," I said. "I let it happen," he said. "Both times. I wanted them to like me. I wanted to be a part of that family, and they made it very clear that part of the cost was—" He stopped. "Was me," I said without heat. He looked at the floor. "I didn't think of it that way. But yes, I think that's what it was." "I know," I said. "I watched you want it. There's nothing wrong with wanting to belong somewhere, Owen. But they were selling you belonging on credit, and the bill was me." He put his face in his hands for a moment. Then, "Theron didn't defend you. When his mother said the things she said, and she said things, 'Ev, this week,' he just went quiet. I noticed he'd called me Ev. He's called me that since he was 14 and thought Mom wasn't cool. He only does it now when he's scared of something." "Did that tell you something?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "It told me something." We talked for 2 hours that morning, not about the money or the wedding or even the Ashbys, mostly. We talked about Ruth, and about the hockey tournaments, and about the cutting table and the homework, and about his grandmother who'd taught me to sew, and who died when he was 11, and who'd never once in her life cared what anyone thought about her work. He cried a bit. I cried a bit. We're criers in this family. We've always been criers. It means the feeling is real. Theron came to see me the following week, by himself. He sat across from me at the work table, and he was quiet for a long time before he said, "I'm sorry I didn't say anything. Not just this week. The whole year. Every time my mother introduced you wrong, or put you at the wrong table, or spoke about your work like it was something to get past. I sat there." He looked at me. "Owen told me about the seam on the jacket I wore to the engagement dinner. He said you'd reset it because it was pulling, and you could see it from across the room, and it bothered you. You didn't say anything. You just fixed it." I remembered that. I'd done it in 5 minutes while they were having drinks, gone back to his jacket where it was hanging in the hall, go and reset the shoulder seam by hand because it had been sewn with too much tension, and it was going to pucker badly in photographs. I hadn't mentioned it. It hadn't occurred to me to mention it. "You paid for everything and fixed our clothes and drove from Sudbury for every event and sat where you were put," he said. "And I let my mother treat you like the help. I'm sorry, Evelyn." "I know," I said. "I believe you. We're all right now, Theron and I. It took time and it took work on all our parts, but we're all right." The money. Noreen recovered $23,400. The venue rebooked that Saturday within 3 weeks. I was right about September in Kingston, and refunded the deposit in full as the clause allowed. The catering was a clean cancellation. The florist was a write-off. The photographer gave back half as a goodwill gesture. Noreen says because I'd been a straightforward client for 11 months, and they'd rather keep a door open. The band, per the contract, returned 50%, $23,400. Out of 38. I know what I did with it, and it's not the flashy part of the story, but it might be the truest. I put it towards something I'd been delaying for 6 years. I bought out my business partner's share of the second location. The shop on Elm is mine outright now. Both locations are. When I unlock the door in the morning, there is no one else's name on the lease. I built it from a factory floor in Sudbury, and it is entirely, unambiguously mine. Owen and Theron got married 4 months later. Small ceremony, 28 people, a private room at a restaurant in Ottawa that Theron had worked at in university, and where the owner gave them a deal because people are kinder than you expect when the occasion is genuine. I sat at the family table, right next to Owen, who reached over at one point and straightened my collar the way I have straightened his, since he was small enough that I had to kneel to do it. I paid for the dinner. Freely, the way giving should be. Nobody discussed it in advance or negotiated where I would sit. Owen called 2 days before and said, "Mom, will you cover the dinner?" And I said yes, and we didn't talk about seating arrangements because there was nothing to negotiate. I was his mother. Where else would I be? Ruth was there. She gave a toast that made everyone cry, including Theron, which Ruth later said was her personal metric for a successful speech. I ran into Claudette once, about 6 months after everything. Garden center on the edge of the city, of all places. She was in the annual section with a cart full of petunias, and she looked up and saw me, and something crossed her face. Not the old practiced warmth, not the gracious performance, just a flicker of a woman who knows how something ended and knows it didn't end in her favor. She gave me a nod. Short, tight. Then she looked back at her plants. I nodded back. Then I went and bought the climbing roses I'd come for, because I have a small garden behind the shop that I've been slowly turning into something, and I had a trellis that needed filling. I wasn't gloating. There was nothing left to gloat about. She has a beautiful house, and a son who doesn't stand up for his wife, and a name that matters in rooms I'll never need to enter. I have 2 shops, and a son who straightens my collar, and a garden that, by next summer, is going to be something to see. People ask me sometimes whether I regret it. Such a drastic thing, they say, the night before the wedding. Couldn't you have just talked it out? I talked. For 11 months I talked, or stayed quiet, which in this situation amounts to the same thing. Quiet is a form of talking, when what you're saying is, I accept this. I accept being introduced wrong and seated wrong and treated as an inconvenience with a good credit rating. Quiet told them exactly what I thought of myself, and they listened. I don't regret the phone call to Noreen. I don't regret the emails she sent at 10:48 at night. I don't regret a single contract I signed in my own name, because those signatures were the only reason I had any ground to stand on when I finally decided to stand. The thing I learned, the thing I would tell you if you're in month 3 or month 7 of swallowing something that tastes wrong. The thing I'd say is this: your money is not separate from you. When you give generously, you give yourself. The day someone wants the money and not the person who earned it, the day they want your hand open and your face turned away. That's not a gift they're receiving. That's a theft they're attempting. And you are allowed to notice the difference. Keep your generosity and your self-respect in the same pocket. They were sewn from the same cloth. Don't let anyone cut them apart. That's the whole of it. One night, one phone call, and $23,000 that came home to a shop on Elm Street where the dress forms stand in a quiet row. And the work is always honest, and the door, every morning, opens with my key.